So this was the position at the end of turn 3 here at Bull Run in the great campaigns of the American Civil War, and hopefully what this kind of shows is the sort of double envelopment that the Union have got going on this Confederate position. So the white markers there are where Confederate brigades have dug in along Bull Run Creek, and they're being outflanked at both ends of that. Up here you've got Tyler's division with McDowell as well, coming around the end of the creek, and very, very sparse defences up here. And then at the other end you've got Heintzelman's division with some backup from another brigade there, and Beauregard trying to stave off disaster down here, nothing trying to stave off disaster up here. And so and these troops are fresh, so you know there's still, Tyler got some more great rolls and has moved into his position here. His troops are still fresh, they're not exhausted, they're not disorganised, they're not nothing. These guys down here, you can see the white bar along the top, Howard and Wilcox and Davis all exhausted. I don't know what's under Heintzelman, what's under him. See, you can see they're disorganised and exhausted, and so all these troops are going to be yeah, god damn it, these MMP counters, if I have one complaint about them, it's that they are very, very slippy. They tend to ping off around all over the place when I try and use tweezers on them. But yeah, so this group of troops around here are not in great fighting shape, disordered, exhausted and so on, but up here these are fit and ready to go and facing very little in the way of opposition. So again, it's going to be a case of these guys pushing on, Hunter in the centre there, and the reserves just coming up to create a central position, so that there's something in the middle here, I guess. And we'll see how we go. What the Confederates are supposed to do, I don't know, because it's not as if they can abandon these positions, even though I think this is Bonham here. Even though Bonham isn't actively facing anything, if he moves away from the river line to come around here and try and shore this up, well, there's just a great big hole straight through to Manassas for these, you know, Confederates to start walking towards. So that, you know, that doesn't look like a great idea. Similarly, I think this is Longstreet here trying to dig in here. It is, and again, if he just abandons that and tries to swing round, again, he's just leaving a great big gap in the Confederate line for more troops to pour through. So they're really going to struggle for an answer, I think. And if the Union can get some efficient attacks off, then this position is going to kind of crumble, because these guys are going to sweep in round here. This is their plan, sweep in round here, cut the rail line, prevent Jackson up over here, Johnson I should say. It's got Stonewall Jackson in it, but it's Johnson's Army of the Shenandoah. Stop this lot joining up. Yeah, that's their plan, and they've got probably 2 days before Johnson's army arrives. These guys, there's no way that they're getting embarked on a train today. It's just far too far to get, and they've got far too much fatigue and exhaustion on them, and they probably won't get embarked tomorrow. They may start arriving in 2 turns time, more likely 3 turns time, and by that stage I reckon this will be all over. So yeah, interesting to see how it pans out. I've had a few thoughts, you know, about what maybe the Confederates should have done in terms of a much slower withdrawal out of these areas, just trying to stay at the edge of where the Union could get to, but at least offer some sort of slowdown. I don't know whether it would be of any use whatsoever, but it has to be said that Tyler has only ever rolled 5s and 6s on his movement rolls, and has therefore sped across the map in a way that the Confederates simply aren't prepared to deal with. Anyway, going on into turn 4, and we've got some stuff to do, you know, maybe reinforcements, maybe the Union start to lose troops, I think, to the 3 months men. So we'll see, you know, we'll see how things start to pan out this turn. early in the fourth turn then here at Bull Run, and there are some points of interest. It's still knife edge stuff, but there are points of interest. So firstly, the Confederates received two tiny brigades of reinforcements, as well as Holmes joining the battle, but they received two tiny brigades. 11th, I assume that's North Carolina, and the 6th North Carolina in here, and they were able to station them anywhere on a railroad, so they started here. Beauregard moved himself up to Bethlehem Church, and then the Confederates did some reorganisation. Longstreet pulled off the river line out into here to support the flank. The Union moved up to threaten some cavalry to threaten to exploit that, but they didn't quite get enough movement points to get across and actually hold the far side of the creek. Then Hunter moved up to hold this sort of central position, but Longstreet, Beauregard was able to get an order in and get his sort of 500 men just about holding this river line in here, but at least they've got something there. And you know, these guys aren't going to want to attack in their sort of disorganised and disordered state, so they might be alright for this turn. You know, he's exhausted and disordered, so they might be alright for this turn if they're lucky. And Beauregard's got at least he's got a tactical bonus as well that he can give them, although Hunter would have one as well if he decided to press an attack. Anyway, so that was the sort of manoeuvrings that went on here, with Longstreet Beauregard just moving in some reservists almost to hold the river line and shifting Longstreet out to put something in the way of this force. Meanwhile, Tyler had tried to move up here, and his luck had run out and he only rolled a 1. Now the interesting thing up here was that these guys were all out of supply. It looked like they had a road network to go back to the depot, the Union depot, which is off map over here, but it's 6 hexes off map, and their maximum range of their supply is 25. So they couldn't actually supply 3 of the brigades here, and you know, Schenker has got an out of supply marker, and McConnell has, and Keyes has. Now, so that doesn't make a huge amount of difference in terms of in fact, it doesn't make any difference at all in terms of their combat efficiency. What it means is that, but they will start losing strength points if they remain out of supply, I believe. I'm not quite sure. They certainly can't remove any sort of disorganised status if they're out of supply. So if they fight a battle and get disorganised, they're not going to be able to get reorganised again. It just makes that whole process of getting yourself, you know, in fighting shape again much more difficult. So that actually may buy the Confederates just a little bit more time, because it's questionable the extent to which they want to press an attack. They still want to press an attack, but how much can they do? And the fact they only rolled a 1 had a really lousy move for their first point of fatigue. Is there, you know, it's a question of whether they just sit and wait a day and sort themselves out, do some foraging, because you can make foraging rolls to get back in supply, and the more fatigue you've got, the more modifier that adds to the roll, makes it more difficult. So if they sat there, didn't use their fatigue up and went foraging, they might get back in supply and be ready to press an attack tomorrow, when and Jackson's still not going to be, you know, this force isn't going to be in their way. So yeah, maybe they wait a day before they press their attack. And the advantage for the Union of doing that is that these guys need to wait a day anyway. They're all exhausted and disorganised, so they're in no hurry to go attacking either. The only thing they really want to do actually is push Wilcox across this ford here, before it gets completely blocked off, so that they've got more units on this side of the creek. Yeah. So that's the situation. We might get a day of relatively little action at the moment because the Union's just gathering its strength for an assault tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Confederates are just trying to build their position as before. I mean, they probably I think I did something wrong. I think Early could have built fortifications there, maybe. Maybe should have done, given the weight of enemy forces around. But still, too late now. He didn't. They have moved up this tiny 500 strength brigade just to exert zones of control in areas that the Union might try and exploit. They've got homes moving up from down here, and they've got another 500 guys trying to hold the railroad open and to prevent any sort of wide Union swings round here to cut the railroad off. But it's interesting to know that this group can't push forward and remain in supply. There's only one more supply phase, and it's in a few more days' time, 3 or 4 more days' time. But yeah, that's intriguing. Hadn't realised that, and it is kind of shaping what's going to happen this turn. End of turn 4 here at Bull Run in the great campaigns of the American Civil War, and one of the really fun things about this system was that not a lot happened, and that's quite unusual in this kind of circumstance, I think, in war games. So Tyler's division up here in a great position, but out of supply and wanting to forage and get supplies before launching their attack. So they minimised their activity so that they could maximise their chances of foraging successfully. And down here again with the Union with local superiority, good position, got across the river, and yet exhausted and disorganised, and therefore not wanting to attack. And it's quite unusual in a war game. Usually attacking troops are sort of disorganised and put out of supply and put into disadvantageous situations by attacking. It's quite rare, I think, to find them in that situation simply by virtue of moving into position. And it's something this game does really well, in that it's very plausible that, units, groups, divisions, whatever, would want to pause and reorganise and, get themselves together and get a sense of where the enemy positions were before attacking. And that happens in this game in a very sort of natural kind of way, which I really admire about it. So that's great. One of the things that's a little bit tricky, the Union are now in position to attack. I mean, they're all set. This is as many troops as they're getting on the board, and they've got their situation here to try and exploit somehow, and they're going to have to try and work out how to do that. They've got their situation up here to try and exploit somehow, although they're going to have to try and work out how to do that. They may be able to force the river here, where there's ferry. Beauregard looks, gives a false impression that there's something actually here, but there's some troops from Louisiana and 1 strength point. So 500 troops there holding this river crossing, which against the several thousand up there might not be enough, even with the modifiers from the creek. So the Union are in a strong position to attack here, as good as it's going to get for them, probably, and all rested and ready to go. And it is, this turn will be July the 20th, the day before the battle historically took place. So we can buy that outcome. Where there are problems is over here. The question is, with Johnson's army of the Shenandoah coming on up here, does it ever get to the battlefield in time? Can you play this game and get this army, any of this army, to the battlefield in time to have any impact? And I'm not sure I have the answer to that question, but the rail rules mean that you can only ship 10 strength points per turn, and there are 26 in his army, so that's 3 turns to transport them all. Barlow here has 5 points on a station, but you're only allowed 3 attempts to embark per turn. You succeed on a 1 to 4, you fail on a 5 or 6, there are a couple of modifiers. Embarking costs you a point of fatigue. Railroading costs you a point of fatigue, and you can't go over your normal 4, so if the rail run that you're trying to do is too long for the amount of fatigue you've got left, then you have to stop, so you may end up just stranded over here, miles away from the battlefield, because you haven't got the fatigue to get there. So unless you're embarking on fatigue 0 or 1, you probably don't get to the battlefield that day, and you use up some of your rail allowance and your 10 manpower allowance. Most of Johnson's army is up here and still got a way to go to get down these roads to these 2 stations here at Piedmont Depot and Rectortown if they come down this way. And unless you're rolling 6s, I mean, they're not going to make it there with sufficient fatigue to rail out today, which means that they then maybe start railing tomorrow, the day of the battle, and they turn up too fatigued to do anything, and then they have to rest for a day, and then they're exhausted, but they can at least act. So the chances are really that Johnson's Shenandoah army doesn't arrive at the battlefield where it fought until a day, 2 days after the battle was fought. And that looks like the most probable outcome to me. Now, given that the whole thing is a bit of a race to Manassas Junction, it looks to me, from initial play and my instincts, that these guys just have to stroll along a road and can rest and blah blah blah, and these guys have to do all this faffing around with rail, that the Union always wins. I mean, the Confederates might actually get to some reinforcements in here one time in 1,000 before the Union or something, but pretty much the Union always wins. And so there's a question as to how interesting that is and how historic that is, given that a lot of the Army of the Shenandoah was in here and did make a difference, as we all know. Stonewall Jackson, there stands Jackson like Stonewall, blah blah blah, if that even happened or whatever. But yeah, the legend that is Stonewall Jackson was formed on this day with him being here. Well, he ain't making it to the battlefield, which is a pity. Now it may well be a very interesting game, and maybe thousands of hours of playtesting went in to get all these dice rolls correct, so that their movement rate and their chances of embarking on the trains and the fatigue cost of getting over here was all perfect to give them a balanced chance of making it to the Battle of Bull Run, where historically they won the day. But I doubt it. It looks to me like this part of the game is somewhat flawed. Which is a pity, but I'm going to push on anyway until it ceases to be interesting. Start of turn 4, lots happening. Sorry, why am I saying turn 4? Start of turn 5, lots happening. Bull Run. So Johnson's Army of the Shenandoah, Confederate Army of the Shenandoah, successfully managed a night march, and that allowed him to move a lot of his forces down this road towards these railroad stations. Then we go into rolling initiative, and the Confederates have won 5 successive initiative rolls, and that has allowed them to embark Barlow over here at River Station, who has railed all the way down over here and is now sitting in Manassas Junction in there. It's allowed Johnson to have another march with his troops, rolled a 6, and he'd rolled a 5 first time round. Rolled a 6, got all the rest of his forces into Rectortown and Piedmont Depot railroad stations. It's allowed Stonewall Jackson then to embark on a train, and although it takes him to Fatigue 4, he's now managed to come down here and establish his force at this Gainesville railroad station on the Confederate flank, which the Union might have quite liked to come round and try to cut off to prevent reinforcements arriving. So they've now reinforced both these railroad depots with 2,500 troops. They've had 1,000 reinforcements show up from the reinforcements table, so this 13 Missouri and something under there as well, some more North Carolina, I think. They've also arrived in Manassas Junction. So before the Union have got their sort of act together to start marching and attacking this morning, they're still preparing. The Confederates have managed to slide another 6,000 men into the theatre, and although they're now Fatigue 4 and can't move and will be exhausted and so on, it's still 6,000 more men that weren't there a moment ago, and that's going to make their life a lot more complicated and provide them with a lot fewer opportunities. It means that Manassas Junction is now properly defended. It means this flank is now properly defended. So yeah, that has changed the complexion quite significantly. If the Union had got 5 initiatives and managed to smash through some of these defences, or managed to start organising attacks and moves, it would have been very different. But the Confederates are winning all the initiatives and have got a couple of good movement rolls with Johnson, and now their position looks, well, almost viable. Almost viable. Let's give it another initiative roll while I've got the camera rolling. And it's another Confederate win. They're going to start running out of things to do with all this initiative. So, yeah, what are they going to do? They can't ship in any more troops today because they've used all their railroad capacity, all 10 of that. So, yeah, it's a question of what they want to do. I suppose they've got homes down here that they want to start marching northwards towards the battlefield. That might be useful. And also I had to correct a mistake. Stuart here had moved down, originally moved down the road there to Front Royale and sat in the station here, and when I checked, cavalry can't be embarked on trains, which makes sense. It's something I'd overlooked it. So I've given him the same number of movement points down this road instead, which is a bit of a kludge. He's actually probably doing worse out of that deal, because he could have been moving and using fatigue instead of sat in a railroad station. So the Confederates have lost out on this deal, but that's my mistake. So I've fixed it to the extent that I've allowed him to come in a more sensible direction. And so another useful thing they could do is roll a couple of d6 for him and have him charging in this direction towards the battlefield as well. Anyway, let's move Holmes. So Holmes is going to get a d6 worth of movement points over here. Green dice for the Confederates. He gets a 5. That's a very good roll for him. He's going to get one of these points of fatigue, and he's going to come 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight up this road toward Brentsville to try and occupy this area in case there's any thoughts of trying to swing round here and cut the rail line, which there probably isn't. He's probably just making his way up towards Manassas, where he can be somewhat useful. So let's just pick him up, slide him up onto here. There we go. Let's give it another roll on initiative. And that is the first Union win, a 6 for them. And now they have to reappraise the situation and decide what they're going to do. But I think they need to attack as quickly as they can. So the Union finally get an activation, and Heintzelman crosses Cedar Run in force with 2 brigades in front of the Confederate positions, Jones and Early, and Howard crossing further downstream or upstream, whichever way it is. But anyway, further up by Sinclair Mill, crossing over into here. And then the Union have got another activation there, so they won the dice off. And that means that Heintzelman can now plan an assault. Now, I think in the introduction I talked about attacking using movement points. There's another type of attacking that you can do where you can assault, which is not using movement points. It means that the commander has to, I think the commander rolls a d6 to get the assault together and has to roll less than their tactical rating, which on Heintzelman is that 6, I believe. And he's going to be trying to assault with all of his troops in here. So he has got Franklin in here, who has got 3,000 men, and he has got Wilcox in here, who's also got 3,000 men. So there's 6,000 guys going to be assaulting, and they are going to be trying to attack Jones, who they have got mostly surrounded. I mean, he's obviously got this area with Early providing sort of support for him. Yeah, so that's the situation we're going to get. I'm going to have to go away and check some rules and stuff on this just to make sure I'm getting it all right, and I don't want to do that on camera because it'll be lots of faffing around. So I had the principles right here, just some of the words wrong. This 1 in the red box is his tactical value, this 6 is his command value, and that's what he's got to try and roll less than to get this assault to happen. He's going to roll a d6 and try and get less than 6. If he rolls a 6, it's going to end the assault immediately. If he rolls less than a 6, he's going to subtract the die roll from that number, from his 6 command value, and that's how many brigades he can send in. So he's got a 1. That means he could include, well, he can include all the forces that he originally specified, which is his 2 brigades. So both his brigades are now going in on this assault, and we're now going to get to determine combat values and calculate modifiers and stuff, and I'll come back when I've done that. Okay, so I've been looking at the modifiers for this combat. This is looking very ugly for the Confederates. The Union have 12 attacking factors. D.R. Jones has 4 defensive factors, so the ratio is 3-1. 3-1 on the ratio chart here is +2 to the attackers. An assault, which is what they're conducting, if you attack while marching you get these kind of modifiers, but an assault is always a +1, that's +3. Here's where it gets really sticky though. So all of the hexes around D.R. Jones are covered, which means they're either in zones of control of enemy units or they're sort of impassable to him. Whether or not this riverside is impassable, if it's impassable then that would be a covered hex because of the river. If it's not impassable then it's a covered hex because Heintzelman exerts a zone of control into it. Either way, that's covered, that's covered, that's covered, that's covered. This is covered by Howard, he's got a zone of control into there, and this is covered by Heintzelman, he's got a zone of control into there. So they have got +4 because they've got him completely surrounded, and the only thing in his favour is Early sat here, which takes 1 off that, so there's a +3 because of the flanking bonuses for Heintzelman. So he's got +3 for flanking, +2 for 3-1 odds, and +1 because of his assault. He's got +6 on this attack. And what happens is, we should look at tactical factors, but D.R. Jones has got 1 and Heintzelman's got 1, so that cancels out, and there's no artillery because it's in woods. So the overall result is a +6 to the Union. Now what happens is both sides roll a die, and the blue is the Union, the green is the Confederates, and the Union get +6, and then we take a differential and we look at the results chart. So we can see it's 2-1, so that becomes 8-1, and it's a +7 for the Union. So if we come down here, attacker's combat value was 12, and we look down here to the +7 row, and it's just got a little A, and all that means, I think, is that the attackers can advance after combat. I'm fairly sure that just means they can advance after combat. I don't see where it's explained in all these things. F, E, R, D, R, R, A, unit may advance after combat. There it is. So they have suffered no ill effects at all. And the defender has a combat value of 4 on this column here, and they're coming down to the +7, and that is a 2DR result. So I think they're going to take 2 losses. Yep. Then they are going to be disorganised, and then they are going to have to rout and be demoralised -2. So yeah, that's going to all be quite unpleasant. They're also going to have to, they may have to take losses from the rout as well, depending on what routes they've got, because normally you have to try and route along roads, and I suppose they can into here, but I'll have to be very careful on the route tables to check what happens, because there's a sort of retreat priorities table that you follow. If they can, they will follow railroads into more distant hexes and out of enemy zones of control, which in this case isn't possible, so we're going to have to look through that priority list to see which way they route. And at certain points, if you're forced to do certain things like this, you can see there are manpower losses attached to doing less favourable or less desirable things while you're routing. So I'm going to have to be careful with that, but let's just take care of the 2 manpower loss and then start looking at that. So in this combat here, the DR Jones has just lost to Heinzelman. He now has to retreat. I've got his demoralised marker on him. His troops are disorganised. He's had 3 fatigue added to him, and he's now got to retreat. The bad news for him is that this is going to cost him more manpower. So the retreat priorities, he could retreat along a road, pike railroad, into a hex more distant from an active enemy unit, and that would be these, they're the active ones. His road goes along here, actually, and not into an enemy zone of control. Well, he can't go there because that's not further from this, and he can't go there because that is in an enemy zone of control. So retreat does not follow a road, pike railroad, into a hex more distant from any active unit and not in an enemy zone of control. So that would be this one here, but that is in an enemy zone of control, so you can't. So that's number 2. Retreat is into a hex more distant from active enemy unit. The hex retreated into is not in an enemy zone of control. Is not into a hex more distant from active enemy unit and not in an enemy zone of control or enemy occupied. Now here's where things get slightly confusing for me, because he could do that by retreating into early if the presence of a friendly unit negates the zone of control, but I don't believe it does. I can't find anything to suggest it does. I'm going to check again. So there is nothing here suggesting that early is negating the zone of control, so DR Jones cannot go that way. So the next option is to retreat into an enemy zone of control, but not an enemy occupied hex, which is more distant from an active enemy unit than the hex retreated out of. And he can do that in a couple of ways. He could do that coming this way, actually. I hadn't looked at this. But he could do that coming this way, and he'd be in the zone of control there, and that is not along a road, and that would cost him 1 manpower. But he could technically retreat down to Sinclair's Mill. Presumably he's allowed to retreat across a ford. I'll check that as well. So I don't see anything preventing him from retreating across this ford down this road or trail. So he can come there as his first retreat hex, and then it becomes a lot simpler because he's on a road, he can move further away from the enemy, he's not in enemy zones of control. So he can come here for his second. He can get further away still along a road there for his third, and further away still along a road there for his fourth. And it looks like he can end up there off camera, just down here, having retreated 4 hexes. Now optionally he could move 2 more, and the question is, does he want to? And in this instance it may very well be sensible for him to do so. So he's going to retreat another one there, and I think this is still further away for him to come here. So he is going to end up routed, sat down there. At least he's somewhere useful, because he's preventing anything from... He's exerting zones of control down here and blocking access to the Confederate railroads. So he has accomplished something useful there. Now the other question is about Heinzelmann, who can advance after combat. Yes, please. So he will come into here. A couple of reasons for doing that, because he wants to keep all his forces together for an assault on early. He wants to give Howard an opportunity to move forward here, and he wants to free up this area for Davis to move forward into here. So that's all great for the Union. And we move on. Let's do another quick initiative roll to see who's going to get the next activation. Do the Union press on, or what? No, the Confederates are going to get to respond here. While the Confederate position is collapsing here, having been routed away from this river line. Now this edge, this flank has been pretty much collapsed. Evans has just been routed away with 2 attacks against him. Mumford's had to withdraw. These guys have now pushed into a position where whoever this is, Kopp, who was over here in Centreville, is now threatened with Hunter moving up here and completely surrounding him with Keyes this side, and Beauregard is slowly getting surrounded and ensnared, and Sherman and Schenker have cut the railroad line, so none of the army of the Shenandoah can now get any further than Jackson there. I don't even know if you can railroad into an enemy zone of control, so it may be that they're pulling up into this area around Haymarket or whatever. So the army of the Shenandoah is going to have to form up as it rails in outside the sort of combat zone over here. The Confederates just won a vital initiative, and the question now is what they want to do. And I think they cannot afford Koch with his 3,000 men here just to get surrounded and duffed up. So I think they have to abandon the stone bridge here. And he's going to be moving from zone of control to zone of control. So irrespective of what he rolls, if he rolls under sufficient movement points, it's going to be a minimum move of 1 hex that allows him to do it. And if he rolls more, zone of control to zone of control is a maximum of 1 hex. However, there is something about it disorganising you as well, I think. That's a little worrying, isn't it? if you move from one zone of control to another, it may well be it ignores the movement concept. If a unit moves directly from one enemy zone of control to another and the two hexes are not connected by a road, pike, railroad or trail, the unit's strength marker is flipped to its disorganised side. So, sorry, I've got the camera pointing in the wrong direction here. So in order to make this move from here to here, he's going to have to become disorganised. Well, anyway, it's better than getting surrounded and chewed up. So I think anyway, it could be that he sits in his fortifications up here and tries to hold out, but that doesn't seem very likely. So that's his move back there. Lost his fortifications and became disorganised, but he's out of that death trap. Right, the next initiative is a big fat 6 to the Confederates over there. They've got another opportunity to do something. They haven't got a lot that's capable of doing anything though. I think the best thing they can do is probably pull Beauregard back so that he's not getting surrounded. So I think I'm not going to roll movement points for him because he's only going to use... Oh no, he's going to use 3, but again, it's a minimum move. He's going to make a minimum move of hex. Oh, let's roll his movement points. How? Let's see what he gets. He gets 4 plus 1, 5. Okay, well, that's enough. He'll go here for 3 into Newmarket. And I think, yeah, I think he's going to stop there. Wondering whether it's better to come down here to Bethlehem Church, but it leaves a big open space here which he doesn't want to leave for these guys to swing around again behind and keep out forcing the flanks of these guys. So he's going to stop there, and that's his move done. I'll do one more initiative roll on camera, and it's another Confederate success, so they have another initiative to use up, and we've got to look quite carefully for something useful for them to do. I don't know if there's much, I don't know if there's much that they really can do of genuine value here. I wonder if Early's probably got one more activation that he can make, and he'd rather be here, I think, than where he is, although maybe not. The other thing they could do is try moving Holmes up from down here. That might be a very sensible thing to do. So let's roll some movement points for Holmes. He's got a 1, which gives him 2, and he'll move along the road in here with D.R. Jones. That was very unfortunate. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for a second and walk away and come back a bit later.